She's a member of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, as well as numerous other organizations. Suffice it to say, she's a very prominent activist in the neurodiversity community. So Emily, thanks for agreeing to be part of this video series.
Well, thanks for interviewing me. I'm flattered and honored.
Emily, to start off with, many people assume that autism is a disease that needs to be cured. I know one of the basic principles of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is autism isn't a deficiency, it's neurodiversity. Some people might say, what do you mean by neurodiversity? Could you talk about that?
Sure. Okay, so when I was young and when people didn't know any better, they said that there was this belief, and there still is with some people, that autistic people need to be cured, that we're broken and that we need to be fixed and we're in our own little worlds and all this. And that's actually not true, at least to us. We believe that it's just another way to be. There's a quote on a t-shirt, autism, it's not a processing disorder, it's just a different operating system. And so that's a good way for, that's how I often explain it to my friends, is that it's simply another way of being, another way your brain is wired, so you take in information and process it differently than someone who doesn't see things that way would. So it's, if, like, say you're a Windows and I'm a Mac, and so our brains just simply process things differently.
But we still get the same work done.
Exactly. We can definitely work together as long as people aren't trying to fix us or cure us. If people appreciate the differences in how we think and can say, hey, you don't need to be fixed. And that's kind of how I came, because for a long time I did think I was broken and such, because I was brought up with my parents and other people constantly trying to figure out what was wrong with me and dragging me from doctor to doctor. And finally I was like, I don't care anymore. I just want to be me and, be the best me I can as I am and not try to fix myself. And because I was like really depressed before that. So that's what I tell people now, that looking at being autistic is something to be cured and something that I was broken with. All it did was make me depressed. But then I started seeing, on the internet glimmers of, like, I think one of my first exposures to the neurodiversity community was on LiveJournal, and there was a conversation about bullying, and there was someone participating, and they had a picture, an icon next to their picture, and or next to their account name was things, and it said Autistic Liberation Front, and that kind of appealed to me. So I wrote to her and asked her what the Autistic Liberation Front was.
So Emily, let me just pick up on one thing you said. You said your brain works and has a different operating system. If I could enter into your brain, I know this is a strange question, in what ways might it be different? So what differences will I notice?
That's a really hard question to answer because I've never had a non-autistic brain, so there isn't anything that I can really compare it to.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that I can answer that. I'm trying to think about ways in which people interact with me, and I might look at them like, huh? I guess, yeah, here's an example. So from what I'm told is that people who aren't autistic would look at a mess in a room and they would say, well, okay, let's look it over here, because that's what they tell me to do. They say just concentrate on one area at a time, but with me, I just look at the mess as a whole, and I get overwhelmed and sit down and say, forget it. Same thing if I've got like a bunch of dishes to do.
So what you're saying then is that when there's a lot of things to be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to separate and sequence which things should be done first, second, third.
Right.
Is that right? That
That,
sort of
mm-hmm.
hits you all at once and you're overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that happens. So, like, if I have friends who understand this, and I can say over Facebook or something, I'll write to them and I'll say, here's what I need to do, and then they'll break it down into steps for me, or they might call the cab company and call the cab for me, because sometimes I have a hard time talking, calling people on the phone. I don't know why, I just do. As I said before, a lot of the thinking has been geared towards fixing or working on normalization, making us undistinguishable from our peers, our non-autistic peers. And so that, the assumption there is that we have to be like everybody else, that there's something wrong with the way we are and the way we think. And so they're trying to take Macs and make them into Windows, going back to the metaphor. And you can't really do that without breaking the Macintosh. So although we can do, there are emulation programs for Windows on the Macintosh, and we can emulate a non-autistic person to an extent, but it's extremely taxing on us, and it really takes a lot of our energy, and it's very hard to do. And there's something called the autistic crash that we sometimes talk about, and that happens when you've been forced to be normal for such a long time, and then you get to a point where you just can't do it anymore, and you kind of fall down emotionally and mentally, and you get really depressed and stuff. And that's why there are some papers that went around that I read when I was younger that why do people regress in their 20s and 30s, and I think that happens when we reach that point. So that's one reason, is that making us normal, trying to make us normal, is actually really, really, really bad for us and painful.
And I imagine, if I can interrupt, all that pressure creates more anxiety.
Exactly,
Makes
right.
it even more difficult to emulate normal behavior.
Exactly, like, I can remember my father and my mother, smacking my hands down when I was stimming. Now, they were doing that because they didn't understand what was wrong, or what, in their perception, what was wrong with me. And I can remember my dad telling me, why are you doing that? You don't want to look, the R word, retarded or anything. So, and that's what they would say. Or he would say, or my quote-unquote favorite, which wasn't favorite at all, was when I'd break some social rule, and he'd get really angry at me, and he'd say, you know exactly what you did wrong, and I'd try and ask him what I'd done wrong, and he wouldn't tell me, probably because of the assumption I was talking about earlier, that, he just thought I was being defiant and non-compliant. I talk about, all behavior is communication. So everyone, especially non-speaking people, when they bang their heads, people say, oh dear, they're hurting themselves, let's stop the behavior, and they might send them to a place like the Judge Rodenberg Center where they get shocked, or some other facility that uses less painful methods of behavior modification. But what they don't do is they don't say, why is this person banging their head? What is he or she trying to say? Or why is he or she so frustrated they're doing it? And, I don't think I even necessarily knew it was frustration myself. I wondered why, but I didn't know what it was until I was, reading Amanda Bagg's blog, and that spelled it out. It was, out of sheer frustration. That's why she would do it. So frustration can be a thing, and that resonated with me.
Yeah, and from what I know from all of my friends who are autistic, for example, Cal Montgomery says when she bangs her head, that is the way she has it when it blows off steam. I know other people who say, I don't want to bang my head, well, my body starts banging it for me.
Yeah, that's another.
So it can be frustration, it can be relief, it can be involuntary, and to presume that it should be stopped without understanding why is not only dumb, It's cruel.
Yeah, it's, how do you feel if you were trying to, I mean, default behavior is communication, so you take it as communication, right? So if you're trying to have a conversation with me and every time you start to speak to me, I jump on you and knock you to the ground, you're not going to be very happy.
You're right, if I'm trying to talk and you're restraining me every time, at some point I'm going to slug you and you're going to see.
And then if I'm staff, I'm going to write that down as a serious incident report and say he slugged me, and they might use, I don't know, what chemical restraint.
It's the whole idea that I think many staff and many parents and many behavioral therapists feel the responsibility to make autistic people do what the normal people, should think they should do, rather than saying, wait a minute, why do I need a person to stop flapping their hands? Why do I need someone to look me in their eyes? For example, if I know an autistic person has trouble with eye contact, I'm quite happy looking away and talking. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's not a sign of disrespect or anything, and a lot of people, thank goodness, are coming to know that. But when I was younger, I actually had a boyfriend who would insist that I make eye contact with him, and he thought he was doing the right thing. See, that's the thing, is that a lot of this thinking comes from a place of, having to fix, and, that thinking that people are doing the compassionate thing when they do this, but it actually hurts us. It hurts our brains to make eye contact or to try and think in other ways.
So it's almost like control,
right,
disguised as help.
Yeah, paternalistic control disguised as help. I know people who live their whole lives and have never been given the opportunity to communicate, have never been given the opportunity for real friends, and by real friends I mean people in the community who might appreciate getting to know them, but they've been kept segregated. And, one of my friends passed away a few years ago, and he never communicated because he grew up in an institution and he wasn't given any communication devices. And then he moved, I guess in his 30s, he moved into a group home, and they said, he's too old to learn any communication skills, so nothing was ever offered to him. And so he would do this, wave his hands. He was non-speaking autistic, and he was great. And then he got sick, and they did various things for him, but I'm not sure they did enough for him. But the hospital actually sent him home on hospice, and he's, sometimes beating his head on the wall or beating other body parts, or, and all they did was that, they got him a helmet for his head and something that went around his waist. But, they got him contraptions to try and control his behavior instead of listening to his behavior, and that was really upsetting to me. And I remember a few days before he died, I went over to visit him, and he just held my hand for a while and gave me a hug, and I told him, I promised him that I was going to work to make sure that no one was ever treated that way and denied access to communication and health care, for their whole life.